There we go. Recording has begun. Thank you and welcome to Realistic Hacking for Games and Fiction. I'm Andrew Gronowski from Shoestone Publishing. In my day job, I am a cybersecurity engineer, actually an engineering manager now. And by night, my secret identity is founder and owner of Shoestone Publishing. We actually publish a fantasy game, Maganomia, the RPG of Renaissance wizardry. I've been a tabletop gamer and game master since 1980. I have played some science fiction games like Shadowrun that we were discussing before the seminar started. And I should say that all the opinions in this presentation, and there will be many, and some of them will be strong, are mine and only mine. They should not be associated with the company I work for or even the company that I own. For the discussion portion of this presentation, I expect we'll have about 15 minutes. And the approach I propose is type questions in the chat as they come to mind. My wife and business partner, Vesna, is going to be monitoring the chat. And when we get to the end, she'll recap, depending on how many questions we have. I may be able to answer them all, or she may have to cherry pick. I don't mind staying a few minutes late, but I don't want to turn this into a 2-hour talk. It's scheduled for 1 hour, and I want to be respectful of people's time. This is the agenda that I want to tell you about so you can understand if you're in the right place. And if you were expecting something different and this talk isn't for you, don't feel obligated to sit through the whole thing. Life is too short for that. I'm going to be describing the general characteristics of several kinds of real-world attacks. I was expecting to use recent examples, but 2017 was actually a vintage year for cyber attacks, and all my favorite examples are from 2017, and I'll explain 2 of those. I will use real technical jargon, pausing to explain what it is, but the presentation itself will not have any technical detail. This is not going to tell you how to protect yourself or your company from cyber attacks. And I'll be emphasizing 21st century scenarios. What cyber attacks might look like in a future century is a fascinating topic. I could talk about it all day, and I'm not sure you want me to. First, I want to start with the word hacking. Writers need to know this. Hacking means something different to computer professionals than it does to the news media. I feel like we've lost the fight and the word has been taken away from us. But hacking in its original sense from the early days of computing meant solving problems creatively, a simple solution to a complex problem. I would hack together a program that I needed from 2 existing programs, for example. Its original usage wasn't necessarily related to security, and it's a badge of honor. It's somebody who gets stuff done. The original meaning, or it's taken from a term for somebody who makes furniture using an axe. And computer hacks are either very ugly and crude or very clever and elegant. There's no middle ground, but they both have their place in getting computer systems and networks to work. To this day, you will not hear computer professionals call an attacker a hacker. They'll call him an attacker, or they will use the word black hat, sometimes black hat hacker. That's a reference to American Western movies where the sheriff wears a white hat and the villain, the bad guy, wears a black hat. So that's important context if you're writing in a recent or present or recent past scenario. And hacker culture, what hacker means to me, is explained on the Wikipedia article at the top of the page. Black Hat, it brings me to my favorite movie about cybersecurity. I watched this just a couple of weeks ago, and it is by far the most realistic movie I've seen about cyber attacks. Here's what's realistic about it. It describes an attack chain. Real attacks usually don't hit just one thing. The attacker has to progress from the internet onto some kind of local network, usually to a piece of software. And sometimes they have to transit from software to software, or from computer to computer even. So a real world attack is not one event, it's a chain. And defenders have the opportunity to detect and interrupt that chain at any point, although that in itself is hard as well. At each stage in the chain, the attacker confronts different problems. And this is probably why they call themselves hackers, because the problems can change a lot to get from one stage in the chain to the next. And a certain amount of agility and creativity is required. Also a repertoire. Skipping ahead, attackers usually use tools. They have a bag of tricks, and they use specialized software applications. And you've got to have the right ones in order to complete the attack chain. And in the movie Black Hat, which I think is very representative, the attacker did not make their own tools. They used the tool that was made by a hacker worthy of the name, right? And then they just exploited that to make their attack. There's social engineering on display in Black Hat. That's an important concept that I'm going to explain shortly. Another thing I like about this movie is that it's not about stealing credit card numbers. Their target is a nuclear power plant. And that has actually happened in the real world, and it's very plausible. The US government and other governments around the world are waking up to the fact that what they call critical infrastructure, transportation, energy, communications, can all be severely impacted by cyber attack. And as world builders, as storytellers, we should think broadly about the big interesting stuff. Also, Black Hat shows that the attack was not a lone genius. It was organized crime. And that is completely realistic. About 85% of attacks that are identified or where that can be attributed are attributed to some kind of organized crime. I mentioned social engineering. This is a really important concept in realistic attacks. Social engineering is a term that hackers and professionals use now. It's caught on. It just means tricking a person into doing some action that helps the attacker. The simplest example is click on a malicious email link. It's simple, but that works. That worked on the Democratic National Committee when their email server was breached. The way the attacker got in was sent an email to a member of the committee saying, "Hi, I'm your system administrator. There's been a security problem. Change your password. Here's the link." And the victim clicked on that link that went to an attacker-controlled website. So this was set up in advance. They, not knowing any better, typed in their old password and new password. And this was actually automated so that the passwords were submitted to the real system. And the password was actually changed in their email. So the victim had no indicator that anything out of the ordinary had happened. But of course, the attacker now had the new password, and game over. Social engineering, though, doesn't have to be done by the internet. It's interesting if you have to do it in person, right? From a storytelling perspective, social engineering blurs the lines between cyber attacks, confidence scams, and espionage. There are legends of real attacks that have been conducted where the attacker, for example, dressed up as a network engineer, and just said, "Hey, I'm from your network company, and I need to fix a problem. Let me into your server closet," or impersonate a delivery person and say, "I've got a bunch of packages to deliver." Around, the receptionist let them in, and then they had physical access to all the workstations, in that workspace. So social engineering is a real component of a lot of attacks. About 80% of it is done by email because it works, but you can make more interesting ones in your stories. My next favorite movie about cybersecurity is Die Hard. It's a distant second to Black Hat now, but computer security professionals love this movie. It's our favorite Christmas movie, and we say it's not Christmas until you watch Hans Gruber fall off the top of Nakatomi Tower. What's realistic about it is that the attacker was, again, controlling physical systems. Their ultimate target was a vault in the office building, but also they were able to attack or able to control lights, security gates, the fire alarm. At the time, that was gee whiz stuff in 1988, but it's all totally realistic. This movie predates the internet as we know it. So the attacker had to be on site in order to get control of these systems. In 2021, this could be done from across the planet if the attacker can get into the network. That said, sometimes physical access to the local network might be the easiest way. The attacker has to get through multiple layers. And if the way they get to the local network inside the building is from a terminal inside the building, well, then that just passes through a couple of steps. It's bypassing some other defenses. So it's still realistic that an attacker would want to do that, maybe dressed as a delivery person. And again, the attacker was associated with organized crime and financially motivated, which is totally realistic. This controlling systems in the building, right? The fire alarm, they didn't play with a sprinkler in Die Hard, but could have. It has to do with, it brings me to the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is very much on the minds of security professionals and sometimes attackers, as I will show you. The simplest description of it that I heard, unfortunately, I heard secondhand, so I can't attribute this brilliant quote. I don't know who said it. I heard this secondhand, but the Internet of Things is simply this. Everything that has a power cord or battery in the 21st century will be connected to the internet, whether it makes sense or not. So you will have an internet connected refrigerator. If you have a Fitbit, that's connected to the internet. Your car does talk to the internet if it's 4 years old or so or less. There are internet connected sex toys. It doesn't have to make sense. Stuff just connects to the internet. And the reason mostly is because so many devices contain sensors, and I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. But from a security perspective, there are smart light bulbs. I'm not sure it's smart to have an internet connected light bulb, but these already exist. when every light bulb has an internet connection, every light bulb needs security updates. And this is just a huge problem of scale and the heterogeneity of the systems and devices. So we're completely unprepared as an industry to apply the security updates in a timely manner. When was the last time you ran a security update on your Fitbit? But the Internet of Things is interesting, and it leads me to my first example. In 2017, there was a smart fish tank in the lobby of a United States casino. And the attacker used the thermostat in the fish tank as an entry and exit onto the network in the casino. Their ultimate target was the high roller database, which they did obtain and exfiltrate. Exfiltrate is one of my favorite words in security. It just means it's when people say steal data, I use exfiltrate. The thing that amazes me about this is the attack was detected at all. And it was detected because there was an unusual volume of traffic outbound from the fish tank. And a security company very cleverly observed that. There's an article that explains this, so I provided a link at the bottom. So why this is interesting is you might think security isn't that important for a fish tank. The manufacturer probably thought that. And this is the struggle that I have in my day job, trying to explain to people that in a world where everything is connected to the internet, everything is a stepping stone to something that does matter. Another interesting point I want to make is that sensors are really important, and they're a driver of the Internet of Things. So there was a temperature sensor in the aquarium, presumably so that the person in facilities who's responsible for the aquarium can, have a phone app that shows them when the fish have last been fed and what the temperature is and stuff like that. I mean, it's useful. There was a data breach at the American Credit Reporting Agency, Equifax, where the credit report of everybody in the United States was exfiltrated. And the point of entry, this was also in 2017, which is why I say it's a vintage year. The point of entry was the HVAC system, which was connected to the local network, which was connected to the database of interest. When everything's connected, everything is a stepping stone. To spice this up for your stories, then you may want to consider that the attacker, instead of connecting from the public internet, maybe they need a short range connection like Bluetooth to get to that device, or maybe they have to physically tamper with it. And you can combine an operation in meat space, as I call it, with the cyber attack as one step in that attack chain. Now, this is a fascinating attack. It's very colorful. It's also representative in certain ways. About 20% of attacks go undetected for a long period of time, for months or years. Only 60% are detected within days. Now, defenders are smart, and when they see indicators of compromise, it's quite alarming how smart and aggressive they get about responding to the attack. But they have to see those indicators of compromise. Also, about 25% of reported major attacks or significant attacks in 2020 weren't even targeting the system that was hacked, or that was, I said hacked, that was attacked. The ultimate target was something else. So they were using company A and attacking it just to get to company B. And that's about 25% of total attacks are like that, as far as we can tell from the data that we have. And there are a couple of useful terms that I want to define: vulnerability and exploit. This is mostly for the writers, but it's also going to make sense out of the rest of my talk. A vulnerability is a security flaw or weakness that can have some kind of impact. And I will go on to define these terms: loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, loss of availability. So a vulnerability is a latent flaw that can be used either by accident or on purpose to affect a system in a bad security way. An exploit is an intentional procedure for using the vulnerability. Exploits can be automated, and often are. So attackers will have a toolkit of automated exploits. Vulnerabilities have character sheets. This is a real industry standard called the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or the character sheet of a vulnerability. And it indicates the range of vulnerabilities that exist. I encourage you to go to this URL and play with the calculator. If you hover over the tooltips, you will get deeply geeky information about what exactly all of these different options mean. And I mean, I find it fun to explore that kind of stuff. Briefly, the attack vector is: how do you get to the vulnerability to exploit it? Can you do it over a network? And that means internet. Do you need physical access to the device or system? And then there are a couple of technical categories in between. Attack complexity, low or high. Low means that you can program a computer to do it. High means you have to time it right, or you're relying on some other factor that is outside the attacker's control. So the attacker can only be done under the right conditions. Privilege required. Do you need a password? If you do, that's low. Privilege is required. If you need the admin password, then that's high. Privileges required. And if the attack is exploitable without logging in at all, then no privileges are required. User interaction is just that this standards group wasn't on the same page. I would call this social engineering. Do you need to use social engineering as part of the attack or not? Scope is interesting. This is whether the vulnerability allows the attacker to pivot to something else, to go from company A to company B, computer A to computer B, or even between different processes that are running on the same computer. I guess I won't concoct an example on the fly. And then these last three are called the impact metrics. There are three elements of impact, and we use the mnemonic CIA to remember them. It works. I don't think it's clever to have a three-letter acronym that collides with another three-letter acronym, but this is what's caught on in the industry. C is for confidentiality, which is the ability to read or copy data without permission. The fish tank attack had ultimately confidentiality impact. Integrity means tampering with data, or really tampering with systems as well. So installing malicious software, in my view, is an integrity attack, as would be changing records in a database. And then availability is preventing access to information or systems, either temporarily or permanently. And these are very general, but all vulnerabilities and exploits fit one or more of them. I don't have a case study or a real world story about integrity impact, or not just one at least, but in the real world, what I've seen is people can tamper with system logs to conceal that evidence of compromise that sets off alarm bells in the network operations center. And it's very common that attackers attempt to tamper with the logs. In 2018, it became very fashionable for attackers to install Bitcoin mining software. So they weren't trying to exfiltrate data or anything. They just wanted to use a company's computers to create cryptocurrency and make money that way. It can be very expensive to the victim, by the way. They may want to install malicious software to enable the next stage in their attack chain. So they may want to install a keylogger on a workstation or laptop. They may want to install a network logger on a network appliance. And a dramatic example of an integrity attack was Stuxnet, allegedly done by a US intelligence agency in 2010. The purpose of this attack was to reprogram uranium refinement centrifuges in an Iranian weapons lab in such a way that the centrifuges would destroy themselves. And it worked. And the attack got out into the wild and caused millions upon millions of dollars in damages, and generally a major global security incident in 2010. And that happens all the time, by the way, that target attacks spill out of control. But back to integrity, the sky's the limit when it comes to tampering with data. Attackers, I can imagine, would want to feed fake video into a surveillance system. This, I believe, was a plot element in the film and movie Rising Sun by Michael Crichton. I like the idea of creating fake backgrounds and fake identities for people. Imagine James Bond wants to walk into a casino, but they need him to already be in the high roller database. So it looks like he's been at that casino before and lost millions. I see a comment. I would think integrity attack would include website defacement. Yes, that's true. That's exactly the kind of thing that falls into the integrity category. Reprogramming connected devices is interesting from a narrative perspective. So the toaster tries to kill you, right? Or to frame somebody for cybercrime, I think could be interesting in fiction. I wouldn't want to see it happen in real life. The second case study that I chose is also from 2017, and it was an availability attack, though. Ransomware is a major and rising kind of cyber attack. Ransomware runs a program on a workstation or laptop and encrypts the files on that device, then displays a message to the user saying, oops, your files are encrypted. The only way to get them back is to pay us money, and then our service will provide you with the decryption key and put everything back the way it was. Real world attackers like to use this on hospitals and other critical systems because they're such nice people. And on the dark web, bad actors sell this software. So one of the, I guess, ransomware products in 2017 was called Petya. And this attack looked like Petya, but it's not. That's why it's called not Petya. The first major difference is that if somebody did pay the ransom, they did not get a decryption key and did not release the files. So this just burned down the world. And it got into the global cargo shipping network and caused catastrophic damage, 10 billion estimated economic impact in US dollars. This by far the most impact from a single cyber attack so far. And huge ripple effects. So it started at a shipping terminal in Ukraine. Within a few hours, it had propagated to a port in New Jersey. And then a couple hours after that, the New Jersey Turnpike was hopelessly gridlocked because the cargo terminal was shut down, trucks couldn't unload, and the line of trucks waiting to get into the terminal backed up past the exits. Impact was $300 million to Maersk and FedEx, and 300 million here, 300 million there. Pretty soon that adds up to serious money. I have a personal story about NotPetya. I talked to a guy who said that he was involved in the incident response, and he came up with a hack, a white hat hack, to restore the backups, even though they were encrypted. I see a question about why is it so difficult to decrypt files. I'll get to that at the end. I'll come back to it. So this acquaintance of mine was involved in the incident response. He said that he figured out a hacky way to restore from backup, but the network devices were already bricked as well. And in order for ransomware to work effectively, it has to affect not just the files, but it has to affect the backups or backup hardware. And in this case, it also affected the network hardware. So he knew how to do it, but he didn't have a way to push the cure out over his corporate network because the routers that contain the digital map of where the other routers are, the routers were bricked. Now, this was at a global company, though. So there was one regional office that had escaped the attack. They were in Central Africa, in a country where the power grid isn't very reliable, and they suffered from frequent brownouts. And while the attack was unfolding, power was out at that office. And somebody called the system administrator and let them know that an attack is underway and it's destroying our network. So the system administrator at the African office said, well, my systems are down now. I'm not going to turn them back on. I'm just going to stay off the grid. And this was a brilliant move because his network router had the map of the entire corporate network. So you can tweak this just a little bit to make it a super interesting story. Imagine that, your heroes have to go to this remote. Well, I'm not sure it wasn't remote, but it's a country that you might not be able to get to on a direct flight. Okay. And maybe instead of it being a corporate office, maybe it's some obscure communication switch, in part of the phone network or part of the communications network, not in an air-conditioned office, or maybe in some, I don't know, device connected to an undersea cable. Now I'm making stuff up, but you can make a great story about the response to an attack. Containment and response are a race against the clock. And by the way, the defenders always win. They just don't prevent the attack from having impact. But so far they always recover. It amazes me that the world recovered from NotPetya, but they did. Another thing I learned from this is that a cyber attack can be the cause of any man-made disaster you want to introduce in your story. So the story doesn't have to be about cyber attack. The story can be about the traffic jam or power outage, or a power plant has failed, or some kind of emergency, maybe a chemical explosion. That can all be explained by cyber attack in 2021. You can use cyber attack as whatever plot device you need to cause your heroes to have bad experiences. This attack was allegedly a Russian attack against Ukrainian transport infrastructure. It did start at a Ukrainian transport terminal. And remember, in 2016, in 2017, and I think even to the present day, Ukraine and Russia are fighting a war. The attack, of course, spread far beyond the original target. Technically, it wasn't very clever, but it had a huge impact. So from those examples, looks like we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers, because I'm coming to the end of what I was preparing. To recap about realistic attacks, real attacks require a chain of exploits. It's not just one thing and you're in. The attackers usually are going to do what works, not what is sexy. If they can get where they're going by something that everybody else is doing, like having someone click a malicious email, they will do that because they're financially motivated. According to the data that I have, it looks like about 90% of attacks are financially motivated. Espionage is interesting from a narrative perspective, and espionage includes both corporate espionage and nation state espionage. And in the modern world, that line is extremely blurry. Some attacks have political motivations. They're down in the noise, but they're interesting from a narrative perspective. Also, 85% of major attacks in 2020 involved a human element, either social engineering or there was an insider, which I guess is an extreme form of social engineering, right? Where the human doesn't do just one thing that you want, but does everything that you want. So if you want to learn more about this topic than a 1-hour seminar can teach you, then I would suggest 2 sources of reading. The Verizon 2021 Data Breach Investigations Report is the sort of thing that I enjoy reading. It's not a super light read, but it's not super hard either if you're willing to Google a lot of the technical terms. And it gives you statistics and it gives you some sort of editorial opinions about trends from network engineers who study this stuff all the time. So don't be afraid to dive into the technical report. If you get to the point where you can understand everything in it just by reading it, my company's hiring. Then there's a book, mostly about the impact to human health and safety in the Internet of Things, but it's also just generally about the implications of global connectivity. And the title is definitely trying to get an emotional response. Click here to kill everybody. But it's a good book. It's approachable. I think it's an easy read, and it's written by one of the luminaries in defensive security. So that is the conclusion of my prepared presentation. Looks like we have a little bit more than 15 minutes for questions and answers. And while I take your questions, I will plug my game, or I'll leave this up. So if you're interested in fantasy games, then maybe this is for you. And there was a question that I said I was going to get back to about why is it hard? Why is it so difficult for someone to decrypt encrypted files, especially for big companies that have so much power? That is a really good question. Encryption, when done properly, is computationally impossible to break. So encryption standards keep changing, where the complexity of the key continues to increase. What you need to know as a writer or as a game designer is that key length changes over time. It really corresponds to the number of computational cycles that are needed. But every extra bit in the key length doubles the number of cycles. So what you should concern yourself with as a storyteller or as a writer is, were they not, what's the exact key length that was in use, but were they using standards that were current at the time? So in the United States, it's NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Every few years publishes guidance saying these keys and these cryptographic ciphers are going to be sunset on this date. So because it will be, computing power will have advanced to the point where they can be cracked in months, not years, not decades. And they're looking for something that would take decades if you had nation state resources. So they're looking for things that would take the NSA a decade or more to crack. That's considered strong cryptography. And strong cryptography is widely available, commercially available. Companies should be using strong cryptography all the time. So that's why it's difficult to decrypt ransomware or encrypted messages. Then another question about NotPetya. I can see harm done and things destroyed, but what benefit does it do goes to the attacker? Great question. And we don't really know the attacker's motivation for NotPetya, but if they were enemies of the country of Ukraine, which I'm ready to believe that they are, experts believe they are, then it's really just like dropping a bomb on the seaport, but way cheaper, harder to attribute, and it gets a totally different international response. So that's the benefit, is that it does a lot of damage without the same kinds of accountability. Vesna, did you see any questions going by that we want to prioritize? I'm scrolling back through the comments.
I just saw a question come through. Okay, so it's totally within the realm of something that can happen to have a character simply slip a random USB drive into an office somewhere and rely on human curiosity in order to create a stepping stone into their system.
Yeah, that happens. There was my boss in my last job was at a U.S. Army exercise where that happened. Actually, he was in the room when the guy plugged in the USB drive, and the configure worm attacked the U.S. Department of Defense networks. So yeah, that happens. Since then, by the way, the US Department of Defense has issued directives to all their network administrators to take the USB ports on their servers and workstations and fill them with epoxy. Let's see. Networks were also compromised. You mentioned also the networks are compromised. Can you also encrypt like systems or only data? Good question. A software is data, right? So yes, there are really, yeah, I'll go there. There are two kinds of computers in the world. There are general purpose computers and there are embedded computers. An embedded computer has the program on the chip and it's built into the chip. This occurs in things like a thermostat, in those. So embedded systems are hard to reprogram and they're on these tiny microchips. Then a general purpose computer has some kind of persistent storage like a hard drive or solid state drive where the program is stored as data and it's loaded. And if in a general purpose computer like that, where the program has to be loaded, you can brick the device by encrypting the program. Scared now, thanks.
Yep. Question just came through. How much could a group of smart teenagers get into compared to how much someone with the money backing of organized crime?
Great question. I'm thinking about that. Smart teenagers. I mean, they could find something like the fish tank. I wouldn't expect them to get into the casino database though. And are the smart teenagers are either going to be focused on the technology or they'll be focused on pulling something off. In other words, are your smart teenagers going to use social engineering or not? That's a big narrative question. I think I was going to say, I think we're past the point where the 1982 War Games movie or a smart teenager can get nuclear launch codes. I was going to say that we're past that point. Maybe. I like to think so. But a smart teenager can obtain attacker tools, right? That will exploit a vulnerability on a system. So for instance, if they obtain an exploit program for, say, Windows 10, right, then smart teenagers would be able to exploit a vulnerability on a Windows 10 box that wasn't patched. So how far can they get? I would say that they could get a lot of surveillance, and that might tickle them. That might make them happy that they can see through cameras on a laptop. That's the sort of thing teenagers would be into. And they can get files. They could probably get, so I wouldn't expect them to really get corporate databases, but they could get things that, again, were off the file system, it's called, of a computer. I guess that's what I have to say about smart teenagers.
Yeah.
How feasible is a USB killer attack? Like an ether killer, but USB sized. I guess I don't know what an ether killer is, so I can't tell you, but I will nonetheless, although I don't know the answer, I will proceed to fabricate one. You can plug a USB drive into a computer and that USB drive can run a program and that program can attack the target system. So it's totally feasible. that really anything that's connected, anytime you make a connection to a computer, you can attack it. It would really, okay, so there's some
We
side
have some really
description.
good ones up there too.
Okay.
So there's one cluster about how are hackers recruited and how could PCs get in touch with them. And then
Mhm.
another one, another how-to question is how would hackers bridge an air gap in their chain of stuff?
How would hackers bridge an air gap? Social engineering. Um, and probably some kind of device like the USBs that we've been talking about. How are hackers recruited? I don't know. I know how white hat hackers are recruited, which is outreach. And there are, events, they share information, their community, their tribe, and they're recruited by members of the tribe. I was recruited because I didn't understand security. I was afraid of it. And I was good at breaking stuff unintentionally, but I found that I could do it repeatedly. So then when it came time to do security research at my company, the project leader said, Andrew, you're good at breaking stuff and then remembering how you broke it. I'm going to have you work on security. That's how I got started. All right.
There's some pretty good suggestions in chat. Patty says, is it? Nope, that was an example.
Okay.
On.
Okay. Questions about recruiting, bad hackers, deep web
Yep.
forum, IRC. Yeah, dark web is just portions of the web that you can't get to by typing an address, typing a domain name into your browser. And yeah, there are dark web communities that exist. Is there a weakening of air gapping? I mean, as more devices come with wireless connections options out of the box? Absolutely. This was hard for me to accept, right? That a nuclear power plant could be attacked by a cyber attack. But imagine this. I mean, the power plant is going to be, it's going to need to exchange data with the grid, with sensors in the grid that are measuring things like voltage in the high tension wires. So there is a connection. Now, that could be separate, it should be separate from the electromechanical systems that, control the fuel supply to the reactor. But, maybe it's not. It's actually, networks are so complicated that it's really hard for network engineers to keep track of how they're connected, and it takes active steps to isolate them. So yeah, there's weakening of air gapping, and mobile devices, personal mobile devices, smartphones, are somewhat promiscuous in what they connect to, and they can act as a bridge. So that's another way that air gaps are weakened. Of course, the classified computing labs and high security situations don't allow you to bring a cell phone into the lab. It can happen by mistake. So for example, somebody might forget to put their smartphone in the locker, or they might smuggle it in knowingly. That would be considered an insider attack. Yeah, I think that's an accurate observation that I just saw come in. The cheaper the network is built, the less secure it's likely to be. And yeah, that's the problem with Internet of Things, low cost devices that are needed for monitoring something like oil pipeline or a say irrigation system, or just temperature in a building. those devices are low cost devices and they're not well secured to begin with, and they don't receive security updates on a reasonable schedule. All right. Well, I think we're in a good position to wrap up. Are there any good tricks to make hacking in role-playing believable to people who know nothing of it? I haven't completely thought about it, but I would structure the attack as a quest, as a series of steps that need to be completed and problems for the characters to solve. And I would put some kind of physical or social engineering operation into that mix. Lee, okay. An automated attack, the USB trick, there's no way to monitor that attack, correct? Not correct. I mean, it can be detected. So if the target system was running really good antivirus, then or really good security software, antivirus is an outdated term, then really good security software could detect and prevent that. And I see someone say, thank you. Just came up with an idea for a fantasy setting. People can hack the magical weave of mages, control animated armors and weapons. Awesome. As the attacker, you can't monitor it. Oh, right, from like the USB automated attack. Well, you got me thinking. I guess that the USB device could record data about the attack. So maybe you could monitor it, but I would call that a separate stage, installing the monitoring presentation. And I'll thank you for your kind words. Glad you enjoyed it. This will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all for coming. The time went really fast. Thank you.